The security officer's hand hovered over his radio, eyes darting between the aisle and the woman sitting upright, calm, composed, as if she didn't belong to the same fraught airspace as the rest of the passengers. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," he said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the murmurs of the waiting passengers. Nia Thompson's hands tightened around her carry-on strap. The murmurs had escalated into whispers, then a few pointed stares. A man in business attire, white smug, smelling faintly of cologne and entitlement, was staring at her like she'd stolen his right to breathe in that cabin. "She's not supposed to be here," he said to the flight attendant, eyes flashing with righteous indignation. Her pulse throbbed against her temples. Every instinct screamed to remain still, to gauge the threat, but the world was shifting beneath her. She recognized the pattern. The gasps, the half-lowered eyes, the unspoken assumption that she was lesser. And yet, she was not powerless. "You think I don't belong here," she said, voice even, controlled, sharper than any blade. The officer's hand tightened. The man's smirk widened. And then, just as the first step toward removal began, Nia's calm, unshakable gaze met the flight attendant's. She could see the hesitation, the flicker of doubt, the truth unspoken. She owned this plane. She owned the airline. And the cabin went silent. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then came the question no one could answer, except Nia. The cabin hummed with a low drone of engines, punctuated by the occasional squeak of luggage carts and the rustle of boarding passes. Nia Thompson adjusted her seatbelt, her hands firm and steady, scanning the rows around her. The passengers were settling in, some chatting, others staring at screens. She felt the subtle currents of attention like heat on her skin, the unspoken judgment from the moment she had stepped onto the plane. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," the security officer said, his tone polite but edged with uncertainty. Nia lifted her eyes to meet his. "Step aside? For what reason?" she asked, calm, her voice even but sharp. The man in the aisle, the one who had called them, leaned forward. He was impeccably dressed, a faint smirk curling his lips. "She's not supposed to be here," he muttered, glancing at the flight attendant like passing judgment could bend reality. Nia felt her chest tighten. Every passenger glance, every whisper was a reminder of the assumptions layered against her. She exhaled slowly, measuring the distance between her composure and the anger clawing inside. "You think I don't belong here?" Her voice was controlled, a knife in the quiet cabin. The officer shifted. "Sir, please." "I insist," the man snapped. "This is a private flight. She doesn't belong." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Heads turned, phones raised. A woman in the back whispered, "I think she's," and stopped, unsure if speaking would worsen the scene. Nia's gaze flicked to the flight attendant, who looked caught between protocol and hesitation. She held her hand slightly, a small gesture of authority. Not command, not threat, just the certainty of presence. The officer's hand tightened on his radio. He glanced at the smirking man, whose confidence had grown unchecked by accountability. But Nia didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She leaned forward slightly, voice dropping but carrying, "Do you know who owns this airline?" The cabin went silent. Phones lowered, murmurs stilled. The man's smirk faltered, a shadow of disbelief crossing his face. The officer froze, uncertainty writ plain. The whispers of passengers became tentative glances. Nia's pulse steadied, her calm, unshakable authority pressed against the simmering tension in the air. She had two choices: escalate, or let the world recognize the truth quietly, exposing arrogance without shouting. The man's gaze hardened. "Sir," Nia said softly, yet each syllable struck like a hammer, "I suggest you think carefully before you accuse again." A tension-filled pause followed, the cabin holding its collective breath. Somewhere in that frozen heartbeat, Nia knew the next move could either dissolve humiliation or ignite it further. And then came the step, the first move toward removing her from her own plane. Nia's eyes didn't waver. She inhaled, silent, steady, a storm contained. For a moment, everything hung on the edge of justice, power, and unspoken truth. Nia Thompson settled into her private office hours later that evening, The hum of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a distant pulse compared to the tension still thrumming in her chest. She ran a hand over the smooth edge of her mahogany desk, her mind replaying the flight. The whispers, the stares, the smug entitlement of the man who had tried to remove her from her own plane. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself remember the journey that had led her here. The path littered with doubt, dismissal, and invisible barriers that only those who had lived them could recognize. Years ago, she had been a young entrepreneur fresh out of business school, standing in a crowded airport lounge while executives in crisp suits laughed behind their magazines. "You don't belong in this industry," one of them had said, smiling politely while slicing through her confidence like a dull blade. Nia had nodded, smiled, and left, only to return years later, with investors who saw her vision, lawyers who respected her contracts, and a growing airline fleet that bore her name on the tail. Every rejection, every sneer, every microaggression had been a building block, and she had constructed something bigger than anyone had imagined. Her assistant, Marcus, entered quietly, holding a tablet. "The news clips are already circulating," he said, voice low. He tapped the screen. Snippets of the in-flight confrontation, passenger murmurs, a fleeting shot of Nia's calm gaze. The social media storm was already growing. Nia nodded. "Let it circulate," she said, voice steady. "I didn't act to be seen. I acted because I couldn't allow that narrative to define me or my airline." Marcus hesitated. "People will talk. Some might exaggerate." "That's the point," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Exaggeration, opinion, gossip, none of it changes the facts. I own this airline. That truth doesn't need defense." She remembered the flight attendant's hesitation, the officer's indecision, the man's faltering smirk. It was a small victory, but one that hinted at something larger. Power was quiet until recognized, authority invisible until challenged. The city lights glimmered through the glass, and Nia felt the weight of her responsibility, not just herself, but of every employee, every passenger, every young black entrepreneur who had been told she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her CFO. "Legal team suggests holding statement until tomorrow. Public reaction is mixed." Nia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Mixed reactions were inevitable. "Draft a statement," she said finally. "We make it factual, controlled. No anger, no threats, just accountability." Her thoughts drifted briefly to the man who had tried to intimidate her. He had believed that visible authority equaled permission, that whiteness conferred entitlement. Nia allowed herself a small, measured smile. Ignorance was fragile, arrogance even more so. She would not raise her voice to dismantle it, but she would expose it carefully, strategically. Her mind wandered to the employees she had hired over the years. Many were women. Many were people of color, each carrying the same invisible load she once bore. Microaggressions in airports, boardrooms, and lounges, moments that chipped away at confidence but never at capability. Nia had seen those same experiences in herself reflected in their cautious smiles, their careful choices of words, their nervous glances around rooms where entitlement often went unchecked. "Your confidence is visible, even online," Marcus said, interrupting her reverie. "People are noticing. Some surprised, honestly." "They'll adjust," Nia said softly. "They always do. The world underestimates women, underestimates black women, and often underestimates leadership when it doesn't fit their expectations. That's not my problem. That's theirs." The office phone rang, cutting through the quiet. Nia answered. It was her personal lawyer. "We need to move quickly if this is going to be contained," the lawyer said. "Not hidden, contained. Let's set terms for exposure and control the narrative." Nia's gaze sharpened. "Prepare everything. I want to address this publicly, but I decide the timing, the method. No reactionary posts, no missteps. Every move has to reinforce what happened, what really happened." She hung up and stood, pacing the office. The leather of her shoes echoed softly across the polished floor. Each step reminded her of the miles she had walked to reach this point. The late nights in airports negotiating leases, the conferences where she had been ignored, the whispered jokes about airlines run by women, the sighs of doubt from potential investors. She had turned all of it into fuel, every slight, every dismissal a thread in the fabric of her success. Nia approached the window and looked down at the city streets below. In that vast grid of lights and motion, she saw her own reflection, composed, determined, unyielding. The confrontation on the plane had been small in the grand scheme, yet symbolic, an emblem of the systemic assumptions she fought daily. Her phone buzzed again, this time a private message from her mentor. "You've changed the game. Hold steady. They'll learn who owns the skies soon enough." Nia smiled, quiet and resolute. The battle wasn't over, hardly begun, but she had the advantage now. Knowledge, strategy, and authority were hers. She had survived the gaze of entitlement, the murmur of doubt, and the aggression of someone convinced she didn't belong. As she sat back down, opening a fresh document to draft her statement, she felt a strange combination of fatigue and exhilaration. The real confrontation, the one outside the cabin, in public perception and legal arenas, was about to begin, and for the first time in a long time, she welcomed it. Because Nia Thompson had not only survived, she had learned how to turn scrutiny, bias, and racism into proof of her own power. The plane had barely touched down when Nia's phone vibrated again. Notifications stacked like a wall. Tweets, posts, short clips, fragments of the confrontation, replayed over and over. Her calm, composed gaze in the cabin, the passengers sputtering accusations, the flight attendant frozen mid-step. It was all there, reshared and reinterpreted by strangers who had never met her. She scrolled with measured precision, feeling the familiar tightness at the base of her skull, the mixture of exposure, adrenaline, and the quiet dread that comes with being publicly scrutinized as both a woman and a black CEO. The cabin footage had gone viral within minutes, and the comment section was a battlefield. Some praising her composure, others insinuating she had overreacted, still others taking the side of the entitled man. Marcus hovered nearby, hesitant to speak. "Some clips have millions of views already," he said. "And, well, the captions vary. Some people are calling it a scene, some are calling it, well," he trailed off, unsure how to describe the veiled biases hiding behind emojis and hashtags. Nia didn't flinch. "Let them see it," she said quietly, voice steady. "If the world thinks they can define me or erase my authority, let them try. Truth doesn't hide." A notification caught her eye. The clip was already being shared by an influential journalist, a snippet from the cabin camera, where the entitled passenger pointed at her, voice trembling with indignation. The headline read, "Passenger calls security on woman. Airline chaos ensues." No mention of her name, her ownership, or the systemic bias playing out in real time. Nia's hands tightened around the phone. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. The battle wasn't just in the cabin. It was now in public perception, media narratives, and social media commentary. Each click, each share, each misinformed reaction could ripple across the industry. She remembered the microaggressions that had peppered her career. The dismissive laughter at conferences, the whispered comments in boardrooms, the casual assumptions that she lacked authority simply because of her skin. And now, all of it was amplified for millions to witness. Marcus glanced at the tablet again. Some outlets are framing it as a conflict between passengers. They're ignoring that that you own the airline. Nia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we correct it," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "We correct it on our terms. Controlled, factual, no emotional exaggeration. People respect authority, yes, but more importantly, they respect truth." She opened a new document and began drafting her statement. Each word was chosen deliberately, balancing professionalism with firm accountability. The first paragraph would acknowledge the incident. The second would affirm her position as CEO. The third would address systemic bias subtly but directly. This was not a performance. It was a blueprint for reclaiming narrative control. Meanwhile, in the background, social media had become a theater of speculation. Short clips looped endlessly, overlaying commentary like a chorus of judgment. Some users criticized the entitled passenger, labeling him a Karen or calling out latent racism. Others dismissed the scene as drama, failing to see the deeper implications. Nia read a few comments aloud, voice low. She overreacted. "That's rich," she said. "Ignore it," Marcus advised softly. It's noise. I can't, Nia said, shaking her head. Noise can become narrative if left unchallenged. If no one speaks truth, people fill the gaps with their assumptions. The next hour was a blur of phone calls, emails, and private messages from her legal team, public relations advisors, and close allies. Each update demanded a decision, a judgment call, a risk assessment. She felt the old, familiar surge of focus, the same drive that had built her airline from a single lease aircraft to a fleet spanning multiple states. But there was something different now: visibility. Every move would be scrutinized. Every statement would be quoted. Every action would carry symbolic weight. The stakes were personal, professional, and deeply social. A private message popped up from an airline employee who had witnessed the incident from the galley. You were calm. You didn't flinch. Everyone was looking at you like they finally realized who you are. Nia exhaled slowly. Her pulse steadied. She understood that visibility cut both ways. It could wound or it could empower. The viral moment, chaotic and uncontrollable, could now be leveraged into proof of both systemic bias and her authority. Her phone vibrated again. Another notification, a live broadcast from a local news outlet showing passengers recounting the incident, their voices overlapping in confusion, judgment, and speculation. Nia paused, studying the video feed. The entitled passenger was still speaking, unaware that the exposure had already started to undermine him. His indignation was visible, but so was his vulnerability. He didn't know her, didn't understand the consequences of accusing her in public. Nia leaned forward, fingers hovering above the keyboard. This was more than a viral video. It was a chance to shift the conversation, to redefine power dynamics, to make visible what often remained invisible: the weight of bias, the subtle aggression, the unearned entitlement. And yet, beneath the strategy, a flicker of unease remained. Exposure carried risk, not just for her, but for the airline, for her employees, for every young woman watching from the outside. The viral storm could protect or destroy. Every second counted. She hit save. Draft complete. Step 1 executed. The hum of the office felt different now, charged, urgent, almost cinematic. Nia looked out the window at the city lights, reflecting on the cabin, the passenger, and the storm she had yet to fully unleash. The battle was no longer contained to a single plane. It had spread, instantaneous and global, and the next move would decide the tone of everything to come. Because in this moment, the world had its eyes on her, and she intended to make it see clearly. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air, a sterile contrast to the storm raging online. Nia Thompson sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture calm, shoulders squared, eyes unflinching. Around her, executives and legal advisors shifted uneasily in their chairs. The same faces that had once questioned her authority now hovered at the edges of panic, unsure how to confront the viral moment that exposed both the passengers' entitlement and the subtle failures of their own institution. Ms. Thompson, began Alan Greer, the airline chief operations officer, voice measured but tense. We need to discuss how this, he gestured vaguely toward the live stream on the conference monitor, is affecting public perception. The footage is circulating rapidly. Our brand image is, well, it's complicated. Nia tilted her head slightly. Complicated how? She asked, her tone precise. Each word was deliberate, carrying the weight of her authority. Greer shifted. Well, there are some claims that the passenger was simply confused, that this escalated unnecessarily. Some of our stakeholders are concerned we're overreacting. A flicker of incredulity passed over Nia's face. Overreacting? A passenger called security on me, on the CEO, based on assumptions about my race. That's not confusion. That's bias. Murmurs stirred around the table. One senior executive, a middle-aged man with a permanent furrow etched between his brows, leaned forward. We understand, Nia. We absolutely understand. But we have to be cautious. Legal implications, potential backlash. Cautious. Always cautious. The words hung in the air, a shield for inaction. Nia's hands rested on the table, fingers tapping lightly. Let me clarify something, she said, voice steady, piercing through the hesitation. Bias is not hypothetical. It is not opinion. It is systemic, documented, and enforceable under law. Our response must be measured, yes, but it must be truthful and decisive. Anything less perpetuates the problem. A young PR consultant shifted nervously in her seat. We've drafted a statement for social media, neutral, factual, but some team members think it's too firm. They're concerned about alienating certain audiences. Certain audiences? Nia's eyebrow arched. You mean those who already believe a black woman has no authority? Her voice cut like glass. We are not negotiating with prejudice. We are correcting it. Alan Greer cleared his throat. Nia, I think. Alan, she interrupted gently but firmly, if you hesitate now, it signals weakness, not just to the public, but to every employee who witnesses inaction in the face of injustice. The table went silent. Some executives shuffled papers. Others avoided her gaze. Nia allowed the silence to stretch. It was intentional, a subtle demonstration of the power she wielded quietly but unequivocally. Legal, she prompted. Her lawyer, Miriam Davis, adjusted her glasses, scanning the room. We recommend documenting everything. Internal memos, statement from employees, video footage. We advise a controlled public statement, affirming your authority and addressing the discriminatory behavior. Timing is crucial. Too soon, and it looks reactionary. Too late, and it appears negligent. Nia nodded. I will not allow timing to dictate the truth. The statement goes out today. It is concise, factual, and names what happened. No euphemisms, no excuses. Bias is not a gray area. It is a violation. A murmur of unease rose from one of the older executives. But Nia, we have shareholders to consider. The board, she cut in smoothly, will understand when presented with facts. If anyone disagrees, they are welcome to step aside. I run this airline. My decisions reflect accountability, not popular opinion. She leaned back, scanning their faces, noting the tension, the subtle fear, the quiet realization that the quiet authority she wielded daily was now undeniable and public. Let's be clear, she continued. This isn't just about a single incident on a plane. This is about establishing boundaries, reinforcing respect, and addressing systemic patterns. Our employees, our passengers, and the public deserve a response that aligns with these principles. A junior manager cleared his throat. So, we don't downplay the passenger's role. No, Nia said firmly. We state the facts. A passenger called security on me due to racial assumptions. We provide evidence, include witness statements, and affirm the policy against harassment. That is all. Everything else is speculation. Marcus, standing quietly in the corner, exhaled softly. He had seen Nia handle every airport microaggression, every boardroom slight, and every subtle dismissal with this level of precision. Yet even he felt the weight of the moment, the viral exposure, the institutional hesitation, the fragile line between public perception and accountability. Nia glanced at the monitor, displaying the clips again. The entitled passenger smirk, the murmurs of surrounding passengers, the subtle tension captured in frame. Every pixel was a record of entitlement confronted by authority. And now, the airline itself was under the microscope. Send the final draft to me, she said. I approve nothing until I see it. We control the narrative, or someone else will. And if someone else does, her gaze swept the room. It won't end well for them. The room fell silent once more. Nia's calm authority, sharpened by years of confrontation and resilience, filled every corner. She was no longer just defending herself. She was defending every employee, every passenger, and the integrity of an institution that often failed to confront bias until it could no longer be ignored. When she finally stood, smoothing her jacket, the tension lingered, but so did an unspoken clarity. The airline would respond decisively. The world was watching, and Nia Thompson was ready. She left the room with measured steps, each one echoing faintly against the polished floor, carrying not just authority, but an undeniable presence that no hesitation, no viral storm, and no entitled accusation could diminish. The office smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and the tension of hurried footsteps. Nia Thompson walked briskly through the halls of the corporate headquarters, her mind racing with the next moves. The viral incident had shifted from a contained, in-flight confrontation to a full-blown media spectacle. Her statement had gone out, measured and factual, but reactions were unpredictable. Allies were emerging, and so were threats she hadn't anticipated. Marcus trailed behind her, carrying a tablet. I confirmed some employees are reaching out, supportive messages, volunteer statements, even a few media contacts wanting interviews. Good, Nia said, voice low but firm. We need truth on our side. But remember, truth can't be manipulated if it's delivered carefully. They stepped into a small conference room where Jasmine Rivera, her head of communications, waited. Jasmine was one of the few people who had seen Nia at her most vulnerable during the early days of the airline. She smiled briefly, but the tight line of her lips betrayed the stress of the moment. You handled the statement perfectly, Jasmine said, placing a hand on the tablet to display screenshots of supportive social media posts. Some are calling it the most decisive corporate response to a racial incident they've ever seen. Nia nodded, scanning the posts. Gratitude flickered briefly, but her focus remained unshaken. Good. We need momentum. But this isn't just optics. Every word, every interview must reinforce accountability, not performative virtue. Just then, the office phone buzzed. Nia answered, listening intently. Her eyes narrowed as she ended the call. Alan, she said, turning to Soho, who had been hovering near the doorway. I need a full report of internal communications this week, especially memos regarding operational decisions during this incident. Alan hesitated. Some things might not be relevant to public perception. I want everything, Nia interrupted. Now, nothing is irrelevant when bias is involved. Marcus glanced at her, eyebrows raised. You think someone leaked something? Nia's gaze sharpened. Someone is trying to control the narrative internally. That's all I know. Hours later, Nia convened a small team of trusted employees. Among them was Deshaun Carter, a senior operations manager who had quietly risen to the ranks despite systemic obstacles. His voice was steady but passionate. Nia, we've been collecting statements from passengers and crew who witnessed the confrontation, Deshaun said. People want to speak, but some fear retaliation. That's why you're here, Nia replied. We'll protect them. Their voices will be amplified, not silenced. Systemic bias thrives in silence. Our job is to break it. The team nodded, a mix of determination and anxiety in their eyes. But then the unexpected happened. A knock at the door. It was Carla Benson, a senior executive who had joined the airline's board only months ago. Her smile was practiced polite, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Nia's team, calculating. Ms. Thompson, Carla said, voice smooth, almost syrupy. I've been reviewing the social media response. I think perhaps we should consider a more neutral approach. We don't want to alienate stakeholders. Nia's jaw tightened. Neutral. The word carried decades of hesitation baked into corporate culture, a code for preserving the comfort of the entitled while silencing the marginalized. Carla, Nia said carefully, we do not sacrifice truth for comfort. Neutrality in the face of bias is complicity. Carla's smile didn't falter. I understand your position, of course, but some board members. Nia's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting we dilute accountability to protect egos? Carla's eyes flickered ever so slightly, an imperfection in a mask of civility. I'm only advising caution, she said. Public perception is delicate. Nia leaned forward, voice steady and cutting. I run this airline. I set the standard for integrity, not convenience. If anyone cannot align with that, they are welcome to step aside. Your hesitation is noted. Carla's face remained neutral, but Nia could see the shift, the subtle calculation of a betrayal waiting to unfold. After Carla left, the room exhaled collectively. Deshaun shook his head. Some people think they can manipulate outcomes from the shadows. She's trying to undermine you quietly. Nia nodded, absorbing the weight of the revelation. Exactly. Allies are essential, but we must identify who truly stands for accountability and who is only invested in appearances. Marcus spoke quietly. What do we do about the external allies, the media, activists, and public figures who've reached out? We leverage them, Nia said, "Their voices can amplify ours, but only if we coordinate carefully. Every statement, every interview must reinforce systemic accountability, not emotion-driven spectacle." Jasmine added, "We've also been approached by passengers from that flight willing to give public testimony." "Good," Nia said. "We'll protect their anonymity if needed, but their experiences must be part of the record. Bias is systemic. Perception must reflect that truth." As the day drew to a close, Nia stood by the window, gazing out at the city. She felt the weight of both support and opposition pressing in on her. Allies were emerging, but so were those whose loyalty was conditional, transactional, or self-serving. The betrayal of expectation, the realization that power is never universally respected, was exhausting. Yet, beneath it all, a quiet thrill ran through her. She was building a coalition, carefully, strategically, with truth as a foundation. Allies could amplify her authority, and betrayals could be anticipated, neutralized. Every calculated step brought the story closer to accountability. Every measured decision reclaimed control over a narrative once hijacked by bias. Nia exhaled slowly, feeling both the fatigue and the quiet exhilaration of purpose. The battle was no longer contained to a single flight or a single viral video. It had expanded, pulling allies and adversaries alike into the orbit of justice. She turned to her team, voice steady and commanding. "Tomorrow, we move forward. Allies speak. Truth is amplified and betrayal is exposed. We do not flinch. Not now. Not ever." The room nodded, a silent affirmation. They had a strategy, a coalition, and a leader unshaken by both. The morning light spilled across the executive floor, glinting off polished surfaces, but Nia Thompson hardly noticed it. Her eyes were fixed on the live feed of the viral clip playing on multiple monitors in the control room. The entitled passenger's smirk, the murmurs of fellow passengers, the flight attendant's subtle hesitation, all replayed in real time. Today, that moment would no longer be just a viral video. It would be a reckoning. "Everything ready?" Nia asked, voice calm, but with an edge that made Marcus flinch slightly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Press release, legal documentation, employee statements, and media contacts. All synchronized. The coordinated release goes out in 15 minutes. She nodded. "Good. Timing is everything. We do this now, before speculation solidifies into narrative." Jasmine Rivera, her communications lead, stepped closer, tablet in hand. Social media teams are cued. Journalists and activists have been briefed. The passenger is unaware that the exposure will link him to both personal and systemic accountability measures. Nia smiled faintly. "Perfect. We let facts do the work. No need for theatrics." She turned her gaze to the monitors, the footage repeating over and over. Each frame was a reminder. Entitlement unchecked, bias unexamined. And now it would meet consequence. The first message went out. A concise press statement. On date, a passenger called security on CEO Nia Thompson based solely on racial assumptions. The airline affirms its zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination. Internal and external investigations are underway. Accountability and integrity guide our response. Immediately, notifications pinged across platforms. The viral clips were linked to the statement. Employees who had volunteered to share statements appeared in short videos recounting their perspective, calm, factual, and measured. Deshaun Carter's voice echoed across screens. This incident highlights the subtle and systemic biases that exist in air travel. Accountability matters. Witnesses came forward because truth must be seen and acknowledged. Nia leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning reactions. The entitled passenger's social media accounts were flooded with comments, many condemning his behavior. Journalists began reaching out for interviews, amplifying the evidence rather than opinion. A soft knock at the door signaled another visitor, Carla Benson. Her polished composure remained, but her eyes betrayed tension. "Ms. Thompson, I wanted to observe." The statement, the employee's videos, she hesitated, then continued, voice tight. "It's impactful. The public reaction is, well, overwhelmingly supportive of your position." Nia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Thank you, Carla. Observing is one thing. actively attempting to dilute truth is another. I hope your priorities are aligned moving forward. Carla's jaw tightened, but she offered a curt nod. Of course. Marcus exhaled quietly. The public is responding faster than expected. Clips are trending. Hashtags reinforcing accountability are rising. People are calling for further investigation into the passenger. Nia's pulse remained steady. Good. This isn't about humiliation. This is about consequence, systemic visibility, and truth. Then came the legal confirmation. The passenger had been formally contacted. Civil charges were being considered for harassment and filing a false security report. Nia watched as her professional reputation began to unravel publicly. Corporate contacts quietly distanced themselves, and online commentary dissected the power dynamics he had ignored. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't personal revenge. It was justice, a reckoning. And yet, the weight of the moment pressed down. Responsibility for her employees, the public, and the integrity of the airline rested squarely on her shoulders. The next call was from a local news anchor. Ms. Thompson, would you like to comment live? The public is demanding your perspective. Yes, Nia said without hesitation. I will speak, but let it be about accountability, not spectacle. Live on air, she delivered a measured statement. I am the CEO of this airline. A passenger called security on me today based solely on assumptions tied to my race. This is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader pattern that must be addressed. We are committed to integrity, fairness, and holding all parties accountable. Harassment and bias have consequences. That is the standard of this airline. The feed ended, but its impact rippled instantly. Supporters shared the video. Journalists quoted her directly. Employees celebrated quietly across offices nationwide. Even distant branches reported newfound awareness and vigilance about systemic bias. Later, Nia convened her executive team. This is the first step, she said, voice calm but firm. Public exposure is critical, but we cannot stop here. Internal policy reviews, employee protection, and systemic checks are ongoing. Visibility alone doesn't create accountability. Consistent enforcement does. Jasmine glanced at her, admiration in her eyes. You've turned a viral moment into a systemic conversation. People are listening. Yes, Nia said, because we made facts, not fear, the center of the narrative. Entitlement and bias can't survive under scrutiny. But we must continue. Strategy, vigilance, and clarity are essential. Even Marcus, normally reserved, allowed a small smile. This is more than viral. It's precedent. Nia exhaled slowly, looking at the monitors one last time. The entitled passenger's smirk was gone, replaced by confusion and realization. The power dynamics had shifted. The system, once unchallenged, was now exposed. And yet, beneath satisfaction, she felt a faint pulse of exhaustion, the emotional cost of visibility, the vigilance required to maintain authority, and the quiet weight of being the figurehead for systemic accountability. She leaned back, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Justice had been served, not through anger, not through spectacle, but through careful, measured exposure, revealing both the bias and the consequences that accompany it. The storm was not over. There would be backlash, dissent, and ongoing scrutiny. But Nia Thompson had claimed her narrative. She had turned harassment into accountability and entitlement into exposure, and the world had no choice but to watch. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, ink, and quiet authority, a stark contrast to the chaos of viral feeds and social media commentary. Nia Thompson sat in the front row, composed, her posture steady, eyes fixed on the proceedings. The entitled passenger, Daniel Harper, sat across the room, his tailored suit now a fragile shield against mounting scrutiny. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of whispered conversations, the occasional rustle of papers, and the muted tap of the judge's gavel. Order in the court. The bailiff intoned, and the room quieted. The attorney representing the airline, Miriam Davis, rose to her feet. Her voice, calm and commanding, carried through the room. Your Honor, we are here today to address harassment and the filing of false security reports by Mr. Harper against our client, Ms. Nia Thompson. Evidence includes eyewitness testimony, flight attendant statements, and video documentation of the incident in question. Daniel shifted in his seat, his smirk replaced by a tense line. He whispered to his lawyer, whose lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to be accountable, that's clear, Nia said quietly to herself, her voice unheard but steady. The first witness took the stand, a flight attendant who had been directly involved in the incident. Her testimony was concise, factual, and unwavering. I observed Mr. Harper accuse Ms. Thompson of being on the flight without justification, she said. He called security despite knowing her boarding credentials were correct. His behavior was aggressive and biased. Cross-examination followed, but the airline's documentation and corroborating statements left little room for obfuscation. Daniel's lawyer attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, citing alleged confusion and miscommunication, but the factual evidence was unyielding. Nia's heart remained calm, but her mind cataloged each subtle expression. The tightness of Daniel's jaw, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the shifting posture that betrayed the unraveling of his entitlement. Justice, she reminded herself, was not spectacle. It was the alignment of truth, evidence, and accountability. When Miriam Davis presented the video evidence, the viral clip with annotations highlighting both the microaggressions and Nia's composed response, the courtroom shifted. Gasps and murmurs echoed quietly. Some spectators leaned forward. Others lowered their eyes, unable to meet the visible weight of bias laid bare. Daniel Harper's lawyer tried once more, emphasizing his client's public embarrassment. This has caused irreparable damage to Mr. Harper's personal and professional life. Nia's gaze snapped toward him, calm but unwavering. Irreparable damage, she repeated silently in her mind. That is a consequence of unchecked bias meeting accountability. When the judge asked Nia to provide her statement, she rose, voice clear and deliberate. I am here not for personal vindication, but to ensure that systemic bias is addressed. What happened on that flight was not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of assumptions that are too often tolerated. Mr. Harper's actions were a violation of policy, law, and basic human respect. Accountability is not vengeance. It is responsibility. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of her words filling the space. She returned to her seat, noting the subtle tension among spectators, the quiet shame flickering across Daniel's face, the visible validation in the expressions of airline employees present in the gallery. The judge conferred with the clerks, then delivered a measured pronouncement. Based on evidence presented, including testimony and documented video records, the court finds that Mr. Harper's actions constitute harassment and filing a false security report. Legal consequences and financial restitution will follow as outlined by statute. Additionally, this court encourages corporate institutions to review and reinforce anti-bias protocols to prevent recurrence of similar incidents. A ripple of subdued acknowledgement passed through the room. Daniel Harper's shoulders slumped slightly, the reality settling in that entitlement had limits, and that societal structures, when enforced correctly, could hold even the most confident oppressors accountable. Marcus, sitting beside Nia, exhaled quietly. It's done. Justice, in its measured way, has been served. Nia nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. Legal outcomes were one thing. The broader systemic shift was ongoing. Bias, microaggressions, and entitlement did not disappear because one case concluded. Yet this was a precedent, a public reminder that actions have consequences, that authority cannot be subverted by prejudice. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, cameras poised, microphones extended. Nia's statement to the press was concise, reaffirming the principles she had laid out in her in-flight and corporate communications. We take accountability seriously. Harassment and bias have consequences. This case highlights the importance of evidence, fairness, and systemic vigilance. We encourage all institutions to adopt similar practices to ensure equity and respect for every individual. Questions followed, but Nia maintained her composure. Each response reinforced clarity, fairness, and principle. Not anger, not personal triumph, but authority grounded in systemic justice. Later, in her office, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The legal reckoning had been public and decisive. Daniel Harper faced consequences, his professional reputation visibly diminished, and the airline had reinforced its commitment to integrity. But Nia's mind was not on victory. It was on vigilance, on the subtle, persistent patterns that require continuous attention. Deshawn entered quietly. "You did it," he said softly. "Not just for you, but for everyone watching." Nia nodded, her eyes distant. "It's never just one person, Deshawn. Every action like this sends a signal, but the work continues. Systemic change doesn't stop in a courtroom." Marcus added, "But today you set a precedent. People will remember this." "Yes," Nia said, voice quiet but firm. "They will remember that accountability has teeth, even when disguised as casual entitlement." The city lights outside the window flickered against the night sky. For a brief moment, the storm of viral chaos, institutional hesitation, and personal attacks had quieted. Justice had been rendered, tempered by law and evidence, and the world had witnessed both bias and consequence. Yet Nia knew the battle was ongoing. Vigilance, strategy, and principled action would remain her constant companions. But in this moment, at least, the scales had tipped toward truth, and that was enough, powerful, deliberate, and undeniable. The office was quiet now, the city lights flickering through floor-to-ceiling windows like distant stars. Nia Thompson sat at her desk, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. For hours, she had navigated the whirlwind, viral exposure, corporate decisions, legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and now the adrenaline ebbed, leaving an unfamiliar weight pressing against her chest. She picked up a framed photo of her younger self at the airline's first terminal launch, the bright smile reflecting hope and ambition untainted by years of subtle prejudice. She traced the edge of the frame with her finger, thinking about the path that led her here. Microaggressions in boardrooms, dismissive remarks from executives, the quiet disbelief in the eyes of passengers and investors alike. Every slight, every undermining comment had accumulated, building a resilience that was now both armor and burden. Marcus entered quietly, carrying a mug of tea. "You should take a break," he said softly. "Even 5 minutes. You've been at this nonstop for days." Nia shook her head gently. "I can't stop now. Not when there's still so much at stake." He set the mug down, eyes meeting hers. "I get that, but even leaders need moments to breathe. You've been carrying the weight of public perception, systemic accountability, and your employees' confidence all at once. That's a lot." She allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I know. Sometimes I forget that carrying it doesn't make it lighter. It just makes it mine." Marcus nodded, understanding. He had seen her navigate microaggressions with calm precision, handle public exposure without flinching, and yet, behind the composure, there was always the quiet toll of vigilance. Jasmine Rivera appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, hesitating for a moment. The employee feedback from today, they're grateful. They feel heard. The public is responding positively to your message. People are calling this a turning point in corporate accountability. Nia exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "Yes," she said softly. And yet the applause doesn't erase the exhaustion, the constant vigilance, or the knowledge that tomorrow brings another challenge. Systemic change isn't a single victory. It's endless effort. Jasmine stepped closer. "You don't have to do it alone. Your team, your allies, we're here. The weight doesn't have to be yours entirely." For a moment, Nia let herself imagine what that would feel like. Shared responsibility, a burden divided by trust, support, and understanding. And yet, even as her mind wandered, she realized that leadership in the face of bias required an unflinching presence. Someone had to bear the brunt, set the example, and maintain clarity when others wavered. She looked out at the city below, the endless grid of lights and movement, reflecting the countless eyes now watching her, analyzing every statement, every decision. The public exposure was empowering in one sense, terrifying in another. Each viral clip, each news segment, each employee statement carried with it a responsibility, one she could not delegate, one she could not afford to falter in executing. Deshawn Carter, still in the office, approached quietly. "Nia," he said, voice careful, "I know today was intense, but You've set a precedent. Your actions didn't just protect yourself. They protected all of us. That's worth acknowledging. She nodded, grateful yet burdened by the truth of his words. I understand that, but I also understand the cost. Every time I step forward, every time I assert authority in a world that questions it, I expose myself to scrutiny, to judgment, to emotional exhaustion. Marcus and Jasmine watched in silence as she continued, voice low, reflective. I have to keep being vigilant, not just for me, but for every employee, every passenger, every young woman who might one day sit in my position. Visibility is a weapon and a weight. It opens doors for accountability, but it also opens you to relentless examination. Jasmine placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. And yet, here you are. You face entitlement bias and corporate hesitation, and you've turned it into proof of resilience, integrity, and leadership. Nia allowed herself a breath she hadn't taken in hours. Yes, but it doesn't erase the moments of doubt, the fear of failure, or the emotional fatigue that comes with being the public face of accountability. That part no one sees. The room was silent, save for the distant city noise. For the first time that day, Nia let herself feel the weight fully. The exhaustion of constant vigilance, the strain of public scrutiny, and the quiet toll of systemic confrontation. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet determination persisted. The fatigue did not erase her purpose. The exhaustion did not negate her authority. Every challenge, every viral clip, every courtroom proceeding had demonstrated one unshakable truth. She had the power to enforce accountability, to demand respect, and to challenge systemic bias without compromise. She looked at Marcus and Jasmine, the two constants who had navigated the storm alongside her. This is far from over, she said. The work continues. But tonight, we acknowledge what we've accomplished. And tomorrow we do it again. They nodded in understanding. The weight remained heavy, but was shared, deliberate, and purposeful. For Nia Thompson, the emotional cost was real, but it was a cost of leadership, justice, and unwavering integrity. As she sat back, sipping her tea, the office lights dimmed, the city outside glowing like a lattice of opportunity and scrutiny. Nia's reflection in the window looked tired but resolute, a woman who had faced bias, systemic hesitation, and entitlement, and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. In that quiet, exhausted moment, she allowed herself to accept both the cost and the power she wielded. The battle had been public. The precedent had been set. And the journey, though exhausting, continued, undaunted, deliberate, and morally unwavering. The morning sunlight poured through the glass facade of the Airline headquarters, catching the logo on the lobby floor. It glinted like a symbol of authority, power, and resilience, attributes Nia Thompson had earned, yet never taken for granted. Today, the aftermath of the viral incident and legal proceedings had rippled far beyond a single plane, a single passenger, or even a single courtroom. Today, vindication was visible. Marcus approached, tablet in hand, eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Nia, the social response overnight has been incredible. Coverage is widespread. People are praising your composure, your statement, and the systemic accountability you've enforced. Clips are trending across networks, and hashtags affirming anti-bias action are multiplying. Nia exhaled slowly, letting herself absorb the momentum. Good, she said softly. Visibility without clarity is meaningless. But this feels like clarity amplified. Jasmine Rivera appeared beside her, smiling. Not only clarity, validation. Passengers, employees, even external observers are sending letters, emails, and videos. They're recognizing both the injustice and the response. Your actions are setting a precedent. Nia tilted her head, reflective. Precedent is not applause. Precedent is structural change. It's a signal to the system that bias has limits, that entitlement cannot override law or principle. The phone buzzed. Nia glanced at the screen. A reporter requesting an interview. Yes, she said, voice calm, deliberate. We'll do it, but the focus is accountability, systemic awareness, and integrity. The interview began live on multiple networks. Nia's statement was precise, deliberate, and unwavering. Harassment and bias are not opinions. They are actions with consequences. The The passenger who challenged me based on racial assumptions is now facing those consequences. This is not about vindication. It is about establishing standards for accountability, fairness, and integrity. Every institution, every corporation, and every individual must recognize that entitlement has boundaries and that justice is enforceable. The segment aired, and immediate feedback poured in. Thousands of messages from young women inspired to pursue leadership, employees feeling empowered to report bias, and social commentators recognizing the rare combination of calm authority and public accountability. Nia allowed herself a brief smile, small, private, but the weight of the responsibility remained. Marcus leaned in. The passenger, his professional networks are already distancing him. Public perception is overwhelming. This could affect his career permanently. Yes, Nia said quietly. Consequences, not revenge. That is the difference. Later that afternoon, the airline held an internal meeting. Employees from multiple departments gathered, some cautious, others eager. Deshaun Carter addressed the group. Today demonstrates something bigger than one incident. It shows that integrity, courage, and accountability matter, and that leadership does not tolerate prejudice. Applause rippled through the room, a mix of relief, pride, and recognition. Nia remained silent, observing. Validation felt external, almost incidental. The true satisfaction came from witnessing systemic respect. Employees emboldened, protocols reinforced, and precedent established. A young intern approached hesitantly. Ms. Thompson, I just want to say thank you. Seeing how you handle that, it gives me courage. Courage to speak up, to hold others accountable, to not let bias silence me. Nia knelt slightly, placing a hand lightly on the intern's shoulder. That courage exists already, she said softly. I only help give it context. Always remember, your voice, your presence, and your integrity are your authority. Never let anyone diminish them. Across the city, social media continued to hum. Analysts dissected the passenger's misjudgment, his arrogance, and the public consequences. News articles chronicled Nia's leadership style, her strategic calm, and her commitment to systemic justice. The entitled passenger, once smug and confident, now faced scrutiny from peers, colleagues, and professional networks, a social and professional reckoning that was public, undeniable, and instructive. Back in her office, Nia allowed herself a moment of reflection. She looked at her reflection in the window. Composed, resolute, yet undeniably human. The journey had exacted an emotional cost, but it also delivered a rare victory. Justice measured, accountability visible, and systemic recognition achieved. Jasmine joined her quietly. You've done more than vindicate yourself. You've created a template for handling bias, harassment, and entitlement in corporate and public spaces. People are taking note. Yes, Nia said softly, voice carrying both gravity and satisfaction. But vigilance remains necessary. Today's victory is tomorrow's expectation. Systemic change is continuous. Marcus, standing near the doorway, added, and yet you've inspired so many. Social media, employees, even external institutions. They're talking about accountability differently now. That's impact. Nia nodded. Impact is good. Change is better. Our goal is not admiration. It's transformation. The day wound down. The office quieter now. The hum of computers and distant traffic, the only accompaniment. Nia walked to the window, looking down at the city grid, a lattice of possibility, scrutiny, and progress. The viral incident, the legal proceedings, the internal and external exposure, all of it had culminated in visible change. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, she acknowledged the emotional cost, the vigilance, the scrutiny, the private exhaustion that no media coverage could capture. Leadership, especially as a Black woman navigating systemic bias, carried burdens invisible to most. But the validation today was undeniable. Justice had been served, precedent established, and systemic accountability reinforced. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Nia turned to her team, voice calm but resolute. Remember this day. Remember the standard it sets. Our responsibility is ongoing, but our integrity is uncompromising. Today, justice was visible. Tomorrow, we continue to work. A quiet chorus of agreement followed. and for the first time in weeks, Nia allowed herself to breathe fully. The battle had been public, the vindication unmistakable, and the consequence for entitlement and bias real. She stood alone for a moment, reflecting, then smiled faintly, quiet, private, and enduring. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. Accountability, visibility, and unwavering integrity were non-negotiable. And in that moment, Nia Thompson felt both the weight and the power of her journey, vindicated, yet ever vigilant. The office was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light. Nia Thompson sat behind her desk, hands folded, staring at the skyline of the city beyond. Weeks had passed since the viral incident, the courtroom proceedings, and the public exposure. Yet, the emotional echo of it all lingered, a steady, underlying tension that reminded her of the cost of accountability. Marcus entered with 2 cups of coffee, placing one beside her. "You should take a moment," he said softly. "Even 5 minutes of quiet. You've been running at full speed for weeks." Nia glanced at him, expression calm but thoughtful. "I know, but the work doesn't pause. Systemic change isn't linear, it's continuous. The social and corporate impact is real, yes, but vigilance remains necessary." He nodded, understanding. "Still, this moment, even briefly, belongs to you." She allowed herself a small sigh, appreciating his gentle insistence. "Perhaps." Jasmine Rivera stepped in next, tablet in hand. "Employee engagement after the incident has been remarkable. Internal surveys show higher confidence in reporting bias, and engagement scores have increased. They feel empowered because of the visibility you maintained." Nia smiled faintly, fingers tapping the desktop. Visibility is power, but it's also a responsibility. The lesson isn't just that bias has consequences. It's that accountability must be constant, deliberate, and systemic. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "And Daniel Harper? His career is unraveling. Professional networks are distancing themselves. He's facing tangible consequences now, not just social scrutiny." Nia's gaze drifted to the city outside. "Consequences were never about revenge," she said softly. "They were about accountability. Power misuse has ramifications, and visibility ensures they are enforced. That's the lesson for everyone, internal and external, corporate and personal." A soft knock at the door interrupted the moment. Deshaun Carter entered, holding a stack of letters and notes from employees and passengers alike. "These came in this morning," he said. "People sharing gratitude, insight, and support. They wanted you to see the impact personally." Nia set her hands on the letters, eyes scanning the words. Expressions of courage, validation, and inspiration filled each page. One employee wrote, "Seeing you handle this gives me courage to stand firm against bias in my daily work. Thank you for leading with integrity." Another passenger wrote, "You reminded all of us that authority, when combined with principle, cannot be undermined by prejudice." Her chest tightened, a mixture of pride, relief, and quiet exhaustion. "It's gratifying," she admitted softly, "but also humbling. The responsibility doesn't end with one victory. Each voice here is a reminder that the fight against systemic bias is ongoing." Marcus spoke gently. "And yet, you've shown that steadfast leadership can inspire change, not just for one incident, but for culture." Nia leaned back, reflecting. She thought about the viral clip, the entitled passenger, the courtroom, the media, and the employees who had supported her. Each moment had carried stakes higher than personal vindication. They were tests of systemic accountability, public perception, and her own endurance. The emotional cost had been steep. The tension, the scrutiny, and the quiet exhaustion of being both visible and vigilant. Yet, beneath it all, a profound clarity emerged. Justice, when measured, deliberate, and principled, could achieve both consequence and transformation. Entitlement faltered under accountability. Bias faltered under exposure. And leadership, when executed with integrity, endured despite public scrutiny. Jasmine stepped closer. "So what's next?" Nia's eyes met hers, calm but resolute. "Next is reinforcement. Policies, employee protections, ongoing audits, education, and mentorship. Systemic change is not a single event. It's continuous. And I will ensure that our standards are maintained, not just for optics, but for principle." Deshaun added, You've also created a precedent beyond this company. Other institutions are taking note. It's rare for someone to navigate both public exposure and internal systems with this level of clarity. Nia nodded. I understand. The visibility amplifies the responsibility. That's why the personal cost, emotional fatigue, scrutiny, even doubt is necessary. Leadership in this context requires both courage and endurance. She paused, letting the weight of her reflection settle. The viral storm had subsided. The courtroom decisions had been rendered. Employees and public observers had witnessed both accountability and precedent. And yet, the quiet work of systemic enforcement, cultural change, and ongoing vigilance remained. Marcus spoke softly, almost hesitant. You've carried this so well, but don't forget to care for yourself too. Nia allowed herself a faint, private smile. Self-care is secondary to systemic care, she replied lightly. Yet beneath the words, there was acknowledgement. Even the strongest, most principled leaders must occasionally bear witness to their own limits, acknowledge fatigue, and allow moments of reflection. The office quieted, filled only with the subtle hum of computers and distant city noise. Nia stood and walked to the window, looking down at the streets below. The city moved, unaware of the microcosm of justice, vigilance, and leadership that had unfolded above it. She allowed herself to feel the satisfaction, not from accolades, but from tangible change, both within her company and the broader narrative of accountability. She turned to her team, voice calm but carrying authority. Remember this day, and remember the lessons it carries. Accountability is not optional. Leadership is not performative. Bias, entitlement, and harassment have consequences, and systemic vigilance ensures they are enforced. The work continues, but the principle endures. Jasmine, Marcus, and Deshawn nodded, understanding the gravity and clarity of her words. They had witnessed both the cost and the power of principled leadership, and they understood their role in sustaining it. As Nia gazed out at the fading light, she allowed herself one final thought. The storm had passed, but the lessons endured. The vindication was real, systemic change was visible, and the emotional journey, heavy as it had been, had yielded a legacy of integrity, accountability, and resilience. She turned back to her desk, steady, composed, and unbroken. The journey was ongoing, but the path forward was clear. Leadership, when executed with principle and courage, was unstoppable. And Nia Thompson, having faced bias, entitlement, and scrutiny, had proven that integrity and vigilance could reshape systems and leave a lasting mark.